Fortune favors the bold, but it destroys the reckless with equal precision. Across America's gilded landscape of industrial empires and retail kingdoms, certain family names once commanded respect that bordered on reverence. These dynasties built department stores that defined shopping, oil fortunes that powered nations, and retail empires that shaped consumer culture itself. Their wealth accumulated across generations until it reached astronomical proportions. Hundreds of millions, then billions, creating financial mountains that seemed impossible to erode. Yet within these very achievements lay the architecture of their undoing. Unlimited resources bred unlimited appetites. Sons and daughters, raised in privilege, discovered that money could purchase everything except meaning, wisdom, or emotional stability. Eccentric behavior evolved into destructive obsession. Family disputes escalated into legal warfare that consumed fortunes faster than bankruptcy courts could process them. Today, we examine how America's most successful dynasties engineered their own spectacular collapses, that the very wealth meant to secure their legacies often became the instrument of their complete annihilation. At the height of his power, J. Paul Getty could buy almost anything on earth. His oil empire spanned continents, his art collection rivaled museums, and his Tudor estate boasted 72 rooms filled with priceless treasures. Yet he installed a payphone for guests in his mansion, refusing to pay for their calls. This paradox, astronomical wealth paired with pathological frugality, would define not just Getty's life, but the tragic dynasty he created. While he meticulously accumulated the largest private fortune in history, his family unraveled. Sons succumbed to substance abuse and despair. A grandson lost his ear to kidnappers, and the Getty name became synonymous with gilded misery. Thus, in today's episode, we'll take you through the full story of how the world's wealthiest man built an empire that made him a king, but left him dying alone in a castle full of treasures he could never truly enjoy, as we recount the Getty family curse, how America's oil fortune became Hollywood tragedy. In 1957, J. Paul Getty opened Fortune magazine to find himself crowned the richest man in America. The irony wasn't lost on him. He read this news from his Tudor estate in England, where he'd chosen to live as a virtual exile from the country that had made him wealthy. The massive estate, Sutton Place, built in the 1530s, stood as a testament to both his wealth and his increasing isolation from American society. Getty had built his fortune through a combination of ruthless business acumen and extraordinary timing. During the Depression, when others were selling, he was buying, snapping up oil companies at bargain prices. His father had laid the foundation in the Oklahoma oil fields, but Paul transformed that modest success into an empire that spanned continents. Unlike his contemporaries who inherited vast fortunes, Getty started in the oil fields, learning the business from the ground up. His father, George Getty, had initially resisted Paul's vision for expansion, preferring to keep their operation modest and manageable. But Paul saw something bigger, a future where oil would power not just automobiles, but the entire modern world. Getty's first major triumph came in 1916, when he struck oil in Oklahoma's Tulsa County, turning a $500 investment into his first million at age 24. This early success shaped his business philosophy, careful investment combined with bold action when opportunity arose. He meticulously studied geological reports and industry trends, building his expertise in the oil business from the ground up. His personal life, however, proved more challenging than his business ventures. Married and divorced 5 times, father to 5 sons by 4 different women, Getty increasingly focused on his business dealings and art collecting. His first marriage to Jeanette Demont lasted from 1923 to 1926, setting a pattern of personal relationships that would be repeated throughout his life. The contrast between his business success and personal struggles became increasingly apparent as his wealth grew. While Getty Oil expanded across the globe, securing lucrative rights in Saudi Arabia that would multiply his fortune many times over, his family relationships became increasingly complex. He maintained contact with his children primarily through letters and phone calls from his English estate. From Sutton Place, Getty managed his empire with careful attention to costs that sometimes bordered on frugality. The famous payphone he installed for guests became a symbol of his complex relationship with wealth, a billionaire who believed strongly in watching every dollar. Yet this same man built one of the world's greatest private art collections, though always with an eye for value and investment potential. His art collection represented more than just an assemblage of beautiful objects. It was a legacy he hoped would endure. Each carefully chosen piece reflected both his taste and his business acumen, as he often managed to acquire masterpieces at surprisingly reasonable prices through clever negotiation and timing. But as the 1960s dawned, Getty's empire stood at its apex. His wealth had grown to unprecedented levels, making him the richest private citizen in the world. None could have predicted the dark shadow that would soon engulf his family, turning their vast wealth into a curse that would echo through generations. The price of creating such an empire would be paid not by its architect, but by those who inherited its burden. The story of the Getty sons unfolded against the backdrop of America's post-war boom, when their father's wealth had reached heights that seemed almost mythological. But money, as each would discover, offered no protection against personal demons, and sometimes seemed to attract them instead. George F. Getty II, the eldest son, bore the heaviest expectations. Born in 1924 to J. Paul Getty's first wife, Jeanette Demont, George entered a world already shaped by the weight of the Getty name. Intelligent and hard-working, he served in World War II before joining Getty Oil. Unlike his father's other sons, George embraced the oil business, displaying an aptitude that suggested he might one day take over the empire. The relationship between father and son was complex. J. Paul Getty respected George's business acumen, but maintained the same exacting standards he applied to everyone in his organization. Their correspondence revealed a formal relationship filled with discussions of business matters but little personal warmth. George worked diligently to prove himself worthy of the Getty name, taking on increasing responsibilities within the company. Eugene Paul Getty, later known as John Paul Getty Jr., chose a dramatically different path. Born in 1932 to J. Paul Getty's third wife, Adolphine Helmley, Eugene Paul initially worked for the family business, managing Getty Oil's Italian operations. However, by the 1960s, he had embraced the counterculture movement that was sweeping Europe. Eugene Paul's second marriage to Talitha Pohl in 1966 marked his complete break from the corporate world his father inhabited. Talitha, a model and actress of Dutch extraction, became an icon of 1960s style. Their palazzo in Rome became a gathering place for artists, musicians, and European nobility. The couple embodied a new kind of aristocracy, one that merged old money with bohemian sensibilities. J. Ronald Getty, born in Berlin on the 19th of December 1929, to J. Paul Getty and his fifth wife, Anne Rourke, maintained a lower profile than his brothers. He chose to forge his own path outside the family business, though he remained involved in family matters, particularly during the later crises that would engulf the Getty name. Gordon Peter Getty, born on the 20th of December 1933, also to J. Paul Getty and Anne Rourke, would eventually emerge as perhaps the most successful of the brothers in handling the family wealth. Combining his father's business sense with artistic sensibilities, Gordon studied music while maintaining his business interests. This unusual combination of talents would later serve him well as a trustee of the Getty fortune. But it was the trajectory of George Getty II that would first signal the dark turn in the family's story. Despite his apparent success in business, George struggled with personal demons. In 1951, he married Gloria Gordon, and they had a son together. But by the early 1970s, he was facing mounting pressures, both personal and professional. The end came tragically on the 6th of June 1973, when George died in his Los Angeles home at age 48. Following a fight with his wife, he had locked himself in his bedroom, consumed a combination of alcohol and pills, and suffered a devastating injury with a barbecue fork. After delayed medical attention, he slipped into a coma and died, leaving behind questions that would never be fully answered. The death of George Getty II marked a turning point in the family narrative. Within months, another tragedy would strike, one that would capture international headlines and forever change how the world viewed the Getty name. The kidnapping of J. Paul Getty III, Eugene Paul's teenage son, would transform the family's private struggles into public spectacle, revealing the dark side of inheriting one of the world's greatest fortunes. On the 10th of July 1973, in Rome's Piazza Farnese, John Paul Getty III, the 16-year-old son of Eugene Paul Getty, vanished. The teenager, known for his bohemian lifestyle and long red hair, had been living semi-independently in Rome, frequenting the city's nightclubs and art scenes while his father battled drug addiction in England. Initially, when the kidnapping was reported, few took it seriously. The young Getty had previously joked about staging his own kidnapping to extract money from his notoriously frugal grandfather. Even the Italian police were skeptical, suggesting it might be a hoax orchestrated by a teenager seeking attention or funds. This skepticism would prove to be a devastating miscalculation. 2 days after the disappearance, his mother, Gail Harris, received a ransom demand. "We have kidnapped Paul Getty's grandson," it stated. The kidnappers demanded $17 million for his safe return. What followed would become one of the most notorious kidnapping cases in history, exposing the dark paradox at the heart of the Getty fortune. J. Paul Getty's response from Sutton Place shocked the world. "I have 14 grandchildren," he declared, "and if I pay 1 penny of ransom, I'll have 14 kidnapped grandchildren." Behind this seemingly callous response lay his conviction that paying ransoms only encouraged more kidnappings. He also harbored doubts about the authenticity of the kidnapping, suspecting his grandson's involvement in staging it. The situation created an impossible bind for the boy's parents. His father, Eugene Paul Getty, was still struggling with drug addiction in London and had no access to the kind of money the kidnappers demanded. His mother, Gail Harris, had received virtually no settlement after her divorce from Eugene Paul and was essentially penniless, despite the family name. The Getty fortune, worth billions, sat tantalizingly out of reach while a teenager's life hung in the balance. As weeks turned into months, the kidnappers grew increasingly frustrated. Their ransom demands were met with silence or negotiations for lower amounts. The boy was held in the mountains of Calabria under harsh conditions, moved frequently between hiding places to avoid detection. His captors, later identified as members of the 'Ndrangheta crime syndicate, began to lose patience. Then, in November 1973, an envelope arrived at the offices of Il Messaggero newspaper. Inside was a lock of red hair and a human ear, along with a threat. Reduce the ransom to $3 million, or the next package would contain something worse. Accompanying the gruesome delivery was a letter from the young Getty. "This is Paul's ear. If we don't get some money within 10 days, then the other ear will arrive. In other words, he will arrive in little bits." This grotesque turn finally spurred action. J. Paul Getty agreed to contribute $2.2 million toward the ransom, while John Paul Getty Jr. covered the remainder. After painstaking negotiations, the final ransom was set at $2.8 million. On the 15th of December 1973, 5 months after his abduction, John Paul III was found at an abandoned gas station between Rome and Naples. The physical ordeal was over, but the psychological damage had only begun. The young Getty called his grandfather to thank him for securing his release, but J. Paul Getty refused to come to the phone. This final rejection would haunt the teenager as he struggled to rebuild his life in the aftermath of the kidnapping. The case exposed the paradoxes of vast wealth, a family with billions at their disposal, yet paralyzed by distrust, dysfunction, and the complex dynamics of inherited fortune. The kidnapping of John Paul Getty III would become more than just a sensational crime story. It would serve as a dark parable about wealth, family, and the price of being born into one of the world's most famous fortunes. In the years following the kidnapping, the dark shadow over the Getty family only deepened. The physical and psychological aftermath would shape not only John Paul Getty III's life, but the entire family's trajectory. In 1974, he married Gisela Martine Zacher, who was pregnant with their son, marking a new chapter in his life while still grappling with the trauma of his captivity. J. Paul Getty never saw his grandson after the kidnapping. From his Tudor estate in England, he continued to expand his business empire and art collection, seemingly detached from the family turmoil that surrounded his name. When he died on the 6th of June 1976 at age 83, his net worth stood at $2 billion. His will reflected both his passion for art and his complex relationship with his family. The bulk of his fortune went to the J. Paul Getty Museum Trust. At the time of his death, Getty's oil empire was at its peak. Getty Oil stood as one of America's largest private companies, with interests spanning the globe. The Saudi Arabian concession he had secured in the 1940s had proven to be one of the most lucrative oil deals in history. Yet the patriarch's passing set in motion a series of events that would transform the family fortune. For young John Paul III, the years following the kidnapping were marked by struggle. In 1981, at age 25, a devastating combination of drugs, alcohol and Valium triggered a stroke that left him severely disabled, quadriplegic, nearly blind and unable to speak. His care would require round-the-clock attention for the rest of his life, with costs running into millions of dollars annually. The 1980s brought significant changes to the Getty fortune. In 1984, after years of complex negotiations, Texaco offered to acquire Getty Oil for $9.9 billion. Gordon Getty, as trustee of the family trust, played a crucial role in orchestrating the sale. While the deal generated tremendous wealth, it also marked the end of the Gettys' direct control over their primary source of wealth, the oil business that J. Paul Getty had built over decades. J. Paul Getty Jr., still battling his own demons in the wake of his son's tragedy, underwent a remarkable transformation. After the death of his beloved wife Talitha and his son's kidnapping, he gradually overcame his drug addiction and eventually became one of Britain's most generous philanthropists. In recognition of his charitable works, he was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II, becoming Sir Paul Getty. The Getty Trust, meanwhile, grew to become one of the world's wealthiest art institutions. The family's legacy would increasingly be defined not by oil, but by art and philanthropy, as the institutions J. Paul Getty founded continued to expand and evolve. But wealth continued to extract its price from the family. Gordon Getty, who had seemed to navigate the family dynamics most successfully, faced his own public scandal in 1999 when it was revealed he had maintained a secret second family in Los Angeles for many years. The news highlighted once again the complex personal lives that seemed to characterize the Getty name. Each generation of Gettys seemed to face its own struggles with the burden of inheritance. The fortune that J. Paul Getty had built through decades of shrewd business decisions had transformed into something else entirely, a complex legacy of art, philanthropy, and family trauma that would continue to shape lives long after the oil wells had been sold. The Getty legacy continues to evolve, shaped by both triumph and tragedy. John Paul Getty III lived for 3 decades after his stroke, requiring constant care until his death in 2011 at age 54. His son, Balthazar Getty, would forge his own path, finding success as an actor in Hollywood, though even he could not entirely escape the weight of the family name. The institutions that bear the Getty name have flourished in ways that perhaps even J. Paul Getty could not have imagined. The Getty Trust, established through his will, has become one of the world's leading cultural and philanthropic organizations. The Getty Center in Los Angeles and the Getty Villa in Pacific Palisades stand as monuments to his vision of making art accessible to the public. Mark Getty, one of J. Paul Getty's grandchildren, demonstrated a different kind of business acumen from his grandfather when he co-founded Getty Images in 1995. This digital media company would become a dominant force in the stock photography and digital media landscape, showing that subsequent generations could build their own enterprises, even if in very different industries from oil. The family's story has captured public imagination in various ways. Books, documentaries, and films have attempted to unravel the complexities of the Getty saga. Most notably, Ridley Scott's 2017 film All the Money in the World dramatized the kidnapping of John Paul Getty III, while the FX series Trust offered a different perspective on the same events. Gordon Getty, now in his late 80s, has devoted much of his life to classical music composition, following his artistic passions while managing the family's business interests. His dual life as both businessman and artist perhaps best exemplifies the transformation of the Getty legacy from pure commerce to a blend of business and cultural pursuits. The Getty family story serves as a complex parable about the nature of inherited wealth in modern America. What began as a pure business empire built on oil and hard-nosed negotiation evolved into something more multifaceted, a source of both cultural enrichment through the Getty Trust's institutions and a cautionary tale about the burdens of inherited wealth. Today, the youngest generations of Gettys continue to make their own mark on the family legacy. Nats Getty, a descendant of J. Paul Getty and child of Ariadne Getty, has emerged as a prominent LGBTQ+ advocate and fashion designer. This represents yet another way the Getty family story has evolved, reflecting changing social values far removed from the conservative oil industry that built their family's fortune. The Getty name remains synonymous with wealth, but its meaning has shifted. What was once primarily associated with oil and industry is now equally connected to art, culture, and philanthropy. The transformation reflects broader changes in American society, from the industrial age that J. Paul Getty dominated to the digital era his descendants now navigate. In 1957, $10 million bought you quite a lot in Manhattan, and for one, Huntington Hartford II, it bought exactly 12 months of fun, his annual trust fund allowance flowing as regularly as champagne at his Newport mansion. But even a fortune that could fill 16,000 A&P supermarkets proved insufficient for a man whose spending habits made Gatsby look frugal. And while ordinary Americans counted pennies at his family's checkout counters, Hartford counted castles, collecting properties like children collect baseball cards. Now, all this would have been sustainable, perhaps, if young Huntington had inherited his family's business acumen along with their billions. He hadn't, and therein lies today's tale of how one man managed to dissolve a fortune as vast as the ocean surrounding his beloved Paradise Island, as we describe the story of Huntington Hartford, the billionaire grocery heir who went broke building a private island. In the glittering world of 1950s Manhattan, $1.5 billion buys rather a lot of groceries, and for Huntington Hartford II, heir to the A&P supermarket empire, it bought nearly everything, except, as we'll discover, common sense. Thus, while ordinary Americans are counting pennies at his family's 16,000 supermarket checkouts, young Hartford is counting houses, yachts, and failed business ventures with the casual disregard of a man who's never heard the word budget. And the trust fund arrangements crafted by his shrewd uncles, John and George Hartford, read like a banker's attempt at creative writing. Young Huntington receives a mere $10 million annually in today's money, a sum that would make modern billionaires wince, while being rather deliberately kept away from any meaningful control of A&P's operations. The generational trust structure, designed to protect both Hartford and the family fortune, proves about as effective as using a paper bag to hold water. Now, about those assets. When we say real estate portfolio, we typically means a modest collection of properties. But Hartford's idea of property collecting makes the Monopoly board look positively minimalist. There's Sea Verge, his Newport pleasure palace, where the champagne flows with more regularity than the tides. His Beekman Place apartment sprawls across 11,000 square feet of Manhattan's most coveted real estate, each room a testament to what happens when unlimited wealth meets unrestricted ambition. The man's yacht isn't just any floating gin palace, It's a converted four-masted schooner that makes modern oligarchs' vessels look positively provincial. His car collection could fill a museum, each classic automobile worth millions in today's market. And speaking of museums, his art collection becomes a rather pointed rebuke to modern art, filled with classical masterpieces that he deems proper art, unlike those frightfully modern abstracts he so famously despises. But it's Paradise Island, formerly the rather unfortunately named Hog Island, that truly showcases Hartford's particular talent for financial self-destruction. Purchased for $10 million in 1962, that's $90 million in today's currency, this Bahamian jewel becomes his obsession. Simultaneously, he pours $17 million into his gallery of modern art in Manhattan, a marble edifice that becomes known as the Lollipop Building, rather fitting for a man whose fortune would eventually dissolve like sugar in rain. The development plans for Paradise Island read like a fever dream. Luxury hotels, a casino that would make Vegas blush, shopping to rival Fifth Avenue, all catering to the world's elite who, presumably, have nothing better to do with their millions. But here's where our tale takes a rather dramatic turn. While Hartford stands on his tropical acquisition, directing construction crews like Caesar surveying Rome, the financial storm clouds are gathering with the subtle intensity of a Caribbean hurricane. What happens when unlimited ambition crashes headlong into financial reality? The answer lies in a cautionary tale of wealth, waste, and wanting rather too much of everything. A modest storefront on Vesey Street in New York, 1859, marked the beginning of what would grow into America's first retail empire, thanks to George Huntington Hartford and George Gilman. The Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company started as a straightforward venture, importing tea directly from China to eliminate middlemen and provide consumers with better prices. Yet, the elder Hartford had something even more precious than tea, an almost supernatural ability to grasp the desires and needs of ordinary Americans. This simple beginning transformed into an unprecedented retail revolution under the leadership of his sons, John and George Jr. Hartford. The brothers didn't just expand their father's vision, they revolutionized it. By 1912, they had created the economy store concept, slashing prices by eliminating credit and delivery services. In 1915, they launched the cash and carry model, and by 1925, they had pioneered the modern supermarket format. A&P stores multiplied across America like cells dividing, from 200 stores in 1900 to an astonishing 16,000 by 1930, generating annual sales equivalent to billions in today's currency. The family's influence extended far beyond retail. They created their own manufacturing facilities, developed private label brands, and established a vertically integrated supply chain that would become a blueprint for modern retail operations. The Hartford name became synonymous with American business success, their wealth rivaling that of the Rockefellers and Vanderbilts. Into this world of unprecedented prosperity stepped young Huntington Hartford II, born to a complex heritage that would shape his destiny. His mother, Henrietta Gerard DuPont, descended from Southern aristocracy, her family's roots stretching back to colonial Charleston. Her extensive European travels and deep appreciation for Old World culture profoundly influenced her son's upbringing. She insisted on the finest education, the right social connections, and an appreciation for art and culture that would later fuel Hartford's ambitious cultural projects. His father, George Huntington Hartford Jr., while part of the A&P empire, carved his own path through innovation, securing numerous patents that added significantly to the family fortune. But it was Henrietta who orchestrated young Huntington's social education with military precision, pushing him into America's most elite circles, where old money reigned supreme and new money, even A&P money, was viewed with barely disguised contempt. At St. Paul's School, among the sons of America's oldest families, Hartford faced daily reminders of his outsider status. Despite his family's vast wealth, he remained the grocery boy to his peers, a designation that cut deep and fostered insecurities that would later manifest in his desperate pursuit of social acceptance and cultural legitimacy. When the time came for Hartford to take his place in the family business, his uncles designed what appeared to be a perfect entry plan. He would start in the advertising department, learning the business from the ground up. But the arrangement proved disastrous. Within months, his unconventional ideas and resistance to authority led to his dismissal, marking the beginning of a pattern that would define his career. Ambitious dreams, followed by spectacular failures. Hartford's drive to step away from the family's established empire for ever riskier pursuits was fueled by a deep-seated ambition shaped in the halls of elite society. Those formative years crafted a man who would ultimately risk and lose one of America's greatest fortunes. In 1964, while New York's art establishment celebrated the raw splashes of abstract expressionism, Huntington Hartford stood in his newly completed gallery of modern art, surrounded by classical masterpieces that cost him the equivalent of $33 million in today's currency. The gleaming white building, dubbed the Lollipop Building by its critics, rose like a marble rebuke to modernism on Columbus Circle. Hartford's vision didn't stop at Manhattan. In the sun-drenched hills above Los Angeles, he established an artist colony where painters could pursue what he deemed real art, far from the corrupting influence of contemporary trends. The California venture proved merely one facet of Hartford's West Coast empire building. His Hollywood mansion became a rotating stage for America's celebrity elite, where one might find Elizabeth Taylor lounging by the pool while Frank Sinatra entertained at the piano. The parties grew legendary, crystalline fountains flowing with champagne, orchestras playing until dawn, and Hartford himself moving through the crowds with a different starlet on his arm each month. Yet even as he played host to Hollywood, Hartford's business ambitions led him into increasingly precarious ventures. The founding of Tosco Corporation in 1955 marked his boldest gamble yet, an experimental oil shale extraction project in Colorado that consumed millions. The technology promised to revolutionize American energy production. Instead, it merely proved that even A&P money could burn as quickly as the shale they processed. His personal life mirrored the volatility of his investments. 4 marriages, each more lavish than the last, punctuated by highly publicized affairs with actresses and socialites, earned him the tabloid nickname Hunt the Playboy. His mother, Henrietta, watched each romantic misadventure with mounting horror. From her Park Avenue apartment, she dispatched a steady stream of letters and emissaries, attempting to guide her son toward more suitable matches. When he announced his engagement to a 23-year-old actress, Hartford being 47 at the time, Henrietta's intervention proved so fierce that the young woman fled to Europe. But it was Paradise Island that truly showcased Hartford's talent for magnificent miscalculation. By 1968, the development had swallowed over $28 million, which, adjusted for inflation, approached $250 million in today's dollars. The Ocean Club rose from the Caribbean shores, its marble floors imported from Italy, its chandeliers from France. Hartford envisioned a casino that would outshine Monte Carlo, hiring architects who had designed for European royalty. Yet the crucial gambling license remained elusive, caught in a web of local politics and international intrigue. As construction costs mounted, Hartford's financial advisors began sending increasingly urgent messages. The A&P fortune, vast as it seemed, was not limitless. But Hartford, standing on his private beach, watching another sunset paint the sky in colors that even his collected masters couldn't capture, remained convinced that Paradise Island would prove his crowning achievement. The next phone call from his accountants could wait until tomorrow. By 1970, the shimmering dream of Paradise Island had become a nightmare of uncollected debts and broken ambitions. Huntington Hartford stood on the powder-white beaches he had intended to rival the French Riviera, watching as his vision slowly unraveled. The Ocean Club, that marble monument to excess, had swallowed over $28 million, the equivalent of nearly $250 million in today's currency. Yet the crucial gambling license remained elusive, caught in a web of Bahamian politics and international intrigue. Creditors, once dazzled by his aristocratic flair, now eyed Hartford with barely concealed suspicion. The A&P fortune, so vast and unassailable, proved no match for his insatiable appetite for grand projects. As construction costs escalated and revenues failed to materialize, his financial advisors issued increasingly dire warnings. But for Hartford, standing in the sunset's glow, the next phone call could always wait until tomorrow. This pattern of magnificent delusion would come to define the final chapter of his empire. A failed automated parking garage in Manhattan, a modeling agency that bled money, and a series of other ill-conceived ventures each took their toll, draining resources that could have shored up his crumbling island dream. The lawsuits piled up, with creditors pursuing him for unpaid bills and defaulted loans. Even his art collection, once a point of pride, became a liability to be slowly liquidated. As his wealth diminished, Hartford retreated from the social circles that had once celebrated him. The dinner party invitations dried up, replaced by collections agents and lukewarm obituaries predicting the demise of a once great dynasty. The man who had once been feted by Hollywood's elite now found himself isolated, both emotionally and financially. In his final years, Hartford made desperate attempts to salvage what remained of his legacy. He poured the last of his resources into an ill-fated resort development in the Bahamas, hoping to recapture the magic of Paradise Island. But the project, like so many before it, collapsed under the weight of his ambition and the reality of his dwindling funds. By the time of his death in 1979, the Hartford name, once synonymous with American business success, had become a cautionary tale of hubris and financial ruin. The downfall of Huntington Hartford had become a cautionary tale that echoed through the corridors of high society. Where once his name had been synonymous with American prosperity, it now served as a sobering lesson in the perils of mismanaging inherited wealth. The shift in public perception, from admiring his lavish displays of opulence to pitying his spectacular financial ruin, underscored the fragility of fortunes built on the backs of others. In the years following Hartford's death in 1979, the family legacy began to fade from the limelight. The Hartford name, once a beacon in the annals of American business, gradually receded from the social scene as the descendants struggled to rehabilitate their tarnished reputation. The cautionary tale of Huntington Hartford had become seared into the collective consciousness of the wealthy elite, a vivid example of how unchecked ambition and a lack of financial prudence could unravel even the mightiest of dynasties. Yet, amid the ruins of his empire, a few of Hartford's cultural contributions managed to endure. The art collection he had so zealously amassed, a symbol of his refined tastes and deep pockets, found new homes in museums across the country. And though the Paradise Island resort he had envisioned as his crowning achievement had crumbled under the weight of his financial overreach, the location itself would eventually be redeveloped into a thriving vacation destination, its legacy outliving the man who had once dreamed of transforming it into a Caribbean Xanadu. In many ways, Huntington Hartford's life story could be seen as a reverse Horatio Alger tale, a man who had inherited untold riches only to squander them through a combination of grandiose schemes and personal indulgence. His legacy served as a sobering reminder that wealth, no matter how substantial, is not a guarantee of success or happiness. For future generations of heirs and heiresses, the cautionary tale of the Hartford fortune's demise would become a guiding light, shaping their approach to financial management and tempering their own ambitions. Picture yourself standing before an architectural marvel on New York's Riverside Drive, where a palace worthy of European royalty once commanded the Manhattan skyline. This was no ordinary mansion, but rather a testament to one man's audacious dream, a 75-room Renaissance chateau that cost an astronomical $7 million in 1906, equivalent to over $200 million today. And this architectural triumph with its gold-leafed ceilings, private art gallery, and three-story pipe organ, stood as a monument to America's first age of excess. This was Riverside, the home of Charles M. Schwab, a man whose rise from mill worker to steel titan embodied the American dream. In the glittering realm of America's Gilded Age, where titans like Carnegie and Morgan reigned supreme, Schwab carved his own empire with theatrical flair. As the first president of U.S. Steel, the world's first billion-dollar corporation, he commanded an annual salary of $100,000 and a bonus of $1 million. Yet beneath the shimmer of success lay a tale of dramatic decline. He spent money like water, hosting lavish parties with champagne flowing, maintaining a fleet of yachts, and building palatial residences that could rival European aristocrats. His appetite for opulence stretched from his summer estate in Loretto, Pennsylvania, to grand philanthropic gestures that seemed more theatrical productions than charity. In today's episode, we'll explore the remarkable rise and tragic fall of Charles M. Schwab, from Pennsylvania's steel mills to a legacy lost, as the excesses of a gilded life faded into mere memories. He seemingly had it all, a fortune that would make today's billionaires raise their perfectly manicured eyebrows. Indeed, at his family's peak, Charles M. Schwab sat atop a staggering $40 billion empire in modern money, a sum that plants him firmly among America's Gilded Age titans. But it's how he flaunted it that would truly capture the attention. For example, his piece de resistance was the absolutely magnificent Riverside mansion in Manhattan. A $200 million, in today's currency, icon of excess, this architectural marvel commandeers an entire city block on Riverside Drive. We're talking 75 rooms of pure French chateau opulence, complete with a Gothic chapel that would make Notre Dame blush and marble staircases that practically demand a grand entrance. The Palm Court accommodated 300 of society's finest, and the original Rodins graced the corridors like common decorations, while priceless European masterpieces adorn walls as casually as family photos. Furthermore, the ballroom, dripping in gold leaf and crystal, served as the stage where America's industrial royalty performs their social dance. But that's merely the city residence. Let's hop over to Immergrün, his summer sanctuary in Loretto, Pennsylvania. This 44-room countryside palace sprawled across 400 acres of what can only be described as botanical perfection. Indoor swimming pool, naturally, private theatre, but of course, bowling alley. Would you expect anything less? The man maintained a collection of properties that would make a real estate mogul weep. Hunting lodges in New Jersey, coastal retreats, urban investments that read like a Monopoly champion's portfolio. His yacht, Loretto, demanded $300,000 annually just for upkeep. That's the price of some people's homes, mind you. Yet beneath this cathedral of consumption lied a surprisingly generous heart. Loretto transformed under his patronage. Schools rose, churches appeared, infrastructure materialized. His charitable gifts matched his personal indulgences, dollar for dollar, funding everything from public libraries to technical schools, particularly in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Thus, it is heartbreaking to see the downfall of such an iconic man, who also happened to grow up with humble immigrant roots, as we'll see in the next chapter. In the shadow of Pennsylvania's Allegheny Mountains, where coal dust and Catholic crosses dotted the landscape in equal measure, the American story of Charles M. Schwab began not with grandeur, but with the quiet determination of German immigrants. His father, John Anthony Schwab, had crossed an ocean carrying little more than hope and calloused hands. The elder Schwab would marry Pauline Farabor, herself born to German-American stock, their union blessed in 1862 with a son who would one day command industrial empires. The family's move to Loretto, Pennsylvania, proved pivotal. It was a town where faith and commerce intertwined, where St. Francis College's spires pierced the mountain mist, and where John Anthony's modest wool and cotton business provided just enough, but only just enough. The young Charles, or Charlie, as townsfolk called him, absorbed lessons that no business school could teach. The weight of a dollar, the value of a handshake, the unwritten code of mountain communities where a man's word carried more currency than the contents of his wallet. In Loretto's Catholic schools, young Charlie's extraordinary gifts began to surface. His memory, described by teachers as near photographic, allowed him to recite entire passages of text after a single reading. But it was his peculiar alchemy of charm and capability that set him apart. Whether calculating complex sums in his head or organizing school events, Charlie Schwab possessed that rare ability to make everyone in his orbit feel like the most important person in the room. At 12, while other boys played at games, Charlie drove stakes for surveying teams, earning $1.50 daily, real money in mountain country. Later, behind the counter of Loretto's grocery store, he displayed an almost theatrical talent for commerce. Customers would watch, mesmerized, as he totaled complex orders in his head, all while engaging in the kind of warm banter that made them forget they were conducting business at all. His mother, Pauline, recognizing something extraordinary in her son, nurtured his gift for music alongside his mathematical prowess. Young Charlie's fingers, equally adept at piano keys and profit calculations, suggested a versatility that would later serve him well in both boardrooms and ballrooms. These seemingly disparate talents, artistic sensitivity and mathematical precision, would eventually combine to create something unprecedented in American industry. A businessman who could both master the minutiae of steel production and inspire thousands with the force of his personality. Yet as young Charlie stood on the cusp of manhood, destiny was preparing an encounter that would transform this promising mountain boy into an industrial legend. In the smoky streets of Pittsburgh, Andrew Carnegie, the nation's foremost steel baron, was about to meet a young man whose extraordinary combination of charm, ability, and ambition would reshape not just one industry, but the very nature of American business itself. In the smoke-filled world of Pittsburgh's steel mills, Charles Schwab's trajectory defied the established order of things. The young man who had once driven stakes in Loretto's mountain soil found himself driving ambition into the very heart of American industry. Carnegie Steel, that great crucible of industrial might, became his proving ground, and Andrew Carnegie himself, the diminutive Scotsman who controlled America's steel destiny, became his mentor. The transformation from manual laborer to engineering assistant took just 6 months, a promotion so swift it left whispers in its wake. But those who worked alongside young Schwab understood. Here was a man who could calculate complex metallurgical formulas in his head while simultaneously charming hardened mill workers and Eastern financiers alike. Carnegie, watching from his fortress-like offices, recognized something of himself in this young man who seemed to master every challenge with almost theatrical ease. By age 24, Schwab commanded Carnegie's Homestead Works, the crown jewel of the steel empire. Workers twice his age took orders from this wunderkind, who remembered not just their names, but their children's birthdays. At 35, he ascended to the presidency of Carnegie Steel, the youngest man ever to reach such heights. His methods differed dramatically from the iron-fisted approach of his contemporaries. Where others ruled through fear, Schwab led through an almost magnetic personal force, pioneering profit-sharing programs that transformed workers into stakeholders. The creation of U.S. Steel in 1901 revealed Schwab's true genius. In smoke-filled rooms where industrial titans plotted the future of American manufacturing, Schwab orchestrated a merger of unprecedented scale. The numbers were staggering. $492 million, America's first billion-dollar corporation. His personal stake, $28 million in stock, represented more wealth than most men could imagine. But for Schwab, this was merely a prelude. The acquisition of Bethlehem Steel in 1904 marked his masterpiece. The struggling company, under Schwab's guidance, became a laboratory for industrial innovation. His gamble on the Bethlehem H-beam, a revolutionary design that would literally reshape America's skylines, demonstrated both technological vision and commercial courage. Every major construction project of the era, from the George Washington Bridge's massive spans to the Chrysler Building's gleaming spire, bore the stamp of Bethlehem Steel. During World War I, when America's industrial might became crucial to Allied victory, Schwab's organizational genius reached its apex. President Wilson himself called upon him to accelerate shipbuilding efforts. The results were spectacular. American shipyards, under Schwab's direction, produced vessels at rates that seemed to defy physical possibility. His empire expanded beyond steel into mining, manufacturing, and real estate. Financial titans like J.P. Morgan counted him as an equal. Political leaders sought his counsel. He moved through the highest circles of global power with the same ease he had once shown in Loretto's grocery store. Yet at the very peak of his success, as Bethlehem Steel's furnaces roared and his personal fortune seemed limitless, destiny was preparing a cruel reversal. In the glittering New York of the 1920s, while jazz bands played and champagne flowed, the first tremors of Charles Schwab's downfall were already rumbling beneath the surface of his seemingly impregnable empire. The market speculation that had once seemed to turn everything he touched to gold began to betray him, each loss driving him to chase ever riskier ventures. Even before Black Tuesday cast its shadow across America, the man who had risen from the Pennsylvania mountains was discovering that financial gravity spares no one, not even industrial titans. The Great Depression struck with the force of a blast furnace explosion. Bethlehem Steel's stock certificates, once worth $200 per share and proudly displayed in oak-paneled boardrooms, now traded for less than the price of a workman's lunch. The numbers told a story of almost mythological destruction, billions in value vanishing like morning mist, personal guarantees on company loans becoming millstones around their guarantor's neck. Each day's financial pages wrote another chapter in the dismantling of a legend. The Riverside Mansion, that monument to Gilded Age excess that had hosted princes and presidents, stood as a silent witness to its owner's reversal of fortune. Unable to meet even basic property taxes, Schwab watched as his greatest symbol of success slipped through his fingers. The estate's foreclosure proceedings drew crowds of onlookers, some perhaps remembering nights when they had danced beneath its crystal chandeliers. His beloved yacht, once the toast of Monte Carlo, was sold for a fraction of its worth. The art collection that had made critics swoon was dispersed to satisfy creditors. The transformation was brutal in its totality. The man who had once calculated complex steel production figures in his head now struggled to balance his checkbook. From his new home, a modest apartment that would once have housed one of his middle managers, he borrowed money from increasingly reluctant friends. His famous smile, once capable of charming millions from the most hardened bankers, grew strained, then rare, then vanished altogether. Health failed as fortune fled. The robust figure who had strode through milliards, memorizing workers' names and personal stories, became stooped, hesitant. His legendary optimism, which had helped build skyscrapers and launch ships, finally buckled under the accumulated weight of disaster. Even Bethlehem Steel, the company he had transformed from a struggling operation into an industrial colossus, slipped from his grasp, though its furnaces continued to burn. When death came in 1939, it found Charles Schwab in circumstances that would have seemed impossible during his glory days. The final accounting showed debts of $340,000, a number that would have seemed like pocket change to the man who had once commanded the equivalent of billions. The obituaries struggled to reconcile the industrial genius who had shaped America's skyline with the broken figure who had died practically penniless. But perhaps the most profound irony lay in what remained of the Schwab legacy. Here was a man who had revolutionized building construction, whose steel had made possible the very shape of modern America. Yet he died without enough money to pay for his own funeral. The decline was so complete that even the mountains of Loretto, where his extraordinary journey had begun, seemed to cast longer shadows over his memory. Yet as the 1940s dawned and America stood on the brink of another great transformation, questions remained about the true nature of Charles Schwab's legacy. In the spring of 1946, as America emerged triumphant from World War II, Emma Urania Dinky Schwab died in relative obscurity, closing the final chapter of the Schwab dynasty. She had outlived her husband by 7 years, inhabiting a world that had forgotten the days when the Schwab name opened every door in New York. Their marriage, childless through the decades, left no direct heir to carry forward either the family name or its legacy. The final accounting of the Schwab estate stood as stark testimony to the completeness of the dynasty's collapse. Creditors picked through the remaining assets like scavengers after a storm, finding little of value that hadn't already been claimed. Even personal items, once treasured for their memories rather than their worth, went to auction. The man who had built billion-dollar corporations left behind a legacy of debt and disappointment. Bethlehem Steel survived its founder's passing, but never recaptured its former glory. Through the latter half of the 20th century, the company that had once revolutionized American construction gradually faded, finally surrendering to bankruptcy in 2001. The furnaces that had forged the steel for America's greatest buildings fell silent in 2003, marking the end of an industrial era that Schwab himself had helped create. In Loretto, where the Schwab story began, preservation of his memory fell to historical societies rather than descendants. The grounds of Immergrün, once manicured to rival European palaces, slowly surrendered to nature's advance. Modern-day members of the extended Schwab family live unremarkable lives, their connection to the steel titan existing primarily in genealogical records and family stories. Yet Schwab's influence persists in unexpected ways. The educational institutions he supported continue their missions, perhaps his most sustainable legacy. Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, transformed its industrial ruins into symbols of renewal, proving that even in decline, Schwab's vision could inspire innovation. The steel-framed skyscrapers he helped make possible still pierce the clouds above American cities, silent monuments to his technical genius. Time has rendered a complex verdict on Charles Schwab's legacy. Modern observers see in his story cautionary lessons about hubris and the ephemeral nature of wealth. His management innovations, the emphasis on worker welfare and the belief in positive reinforcement, have become standard practice in modern industry. The very volatility of his fortune offers warnings to contemporary titans of industry who might believe their own success unassailable. In the end, the most profound aspect of Schwab's legacy may lie not in what he built or lost, but in what his story reveals about the American experience itself. Here was a man who embodied both the promise and peril of the American dream, the rapid rise from poverty to unimaginable wealth, the innovative spirit that transformed an industry, and the hubris that eventually brought it all crashing down. The steel that bore his company's name still stands in bridges and buildings across America, even as the fortune that built them vanished like morning fog. Perhaps that is Charles Schwab's true legacy. Not the millions made and lost, but the physical transformation of America itself. A transformation that, for better or worse, helped shape the nation we inhabit today. Believe it or not, those nickels you toss into cup holders and forget about once built the tallest skyscraper on Earth. Frank Woolworth understood something about American consumption that no Harvard business graduate could grasp. That ordinary people yearned to touch merchandise before buying, to browse without judgment, to participate in retail therapy regardless of their social status. In due time, each humble coin multiplied by millions of customers across hundreds of stores eventually generated enough wealth to build mansions that would later host Taylor Swift music videos. Indeed, the Woolworth family fortune climbed high enough to construct the world's tallest skyscraper, paid for entirely in cash, and acquire opulent mansions that rivaled the estates of industrial barons. Yet within decades of Frank's death, his descendants transformed astute business wealth into reckless family excess, hosting million-dollar Depression-era parties and viewing their five-and-dime heritage with embarrassment. The final act unfolded with bitter family feuds over dwindling assets, the selling of Frank's beloved skyscraper, and the ultimate bankruptcy of an empire built penny by penny. Therefore, in today's episode of Old Money Luxury, we trace the spectacular billion-dollar rise and devastating fall of the Woolworth family, America's most dramatic retail dynasty.
The latest, greatest, ever more spectacular Woolworth Christmas Show. EMI, Super Chrome, tapes that come in threes. Telltale, tape and book, helps a child to read.
While some billionaires these days build rockets to escape Earth's troubles, Frank Woolworth built something far more impressive for his era, an entire retail universe where ordinary Americans could afford a taste of the good life. When death finally halted Frank's remarkable climb in 1919, his personal fortune stood at a jaw-dropping $76.5 million, equivalent to 1/1214th of the entire United States gross national product. Translated into today's currency, that sum would amount to over $1 billion, and some financial historians argue the Woolworth wealth reached even greater heights. So enormous was the Woolworth wealth that when Frank decided to construct the world's tallest building in New York City, he simply paid for the entire $13.5 million project in cash. The family's most notable residence was Winfield Hall, Frank's Long Island mansion that cost $10 million to build, a sum so astronomical for the early 20th century that it represented the equivalent of a billionaire's vanity project today. The estate was so magnificent that it later served as the filming location for Taylor Swift's 2014 music video, Blank Space, a fitting postscript for a property built on the dreams of millions of middle-class shoppers. While Frank himself was reportedly careful with money despite his immense wealth, later generations, particularly Barbara Hutton, became legendary for their extravagant spending habits. Barbara's 18th birthday party in 1930, thrown imprudently during the depths of the Great Depression, cost approximately $1 million in inflation-adjusted currency, creating substantial public backlash at such tone-deaf display during national suffering. Her subsequent lifestyle became a tabloid mainstay, featuring 7 marriages and divorces, including to Hollywood star Cary Grant, with each divorce settlement draining millions from the family coffers.
She had such an unhappy beginning. The fact that her mother committed suicide, the fact that her father didn't care for her.
Known for showering friends, family members, and even complete strangers with outrageously expensive gifts, Barbara maintained homes in multiple countries, accumulated extensive jewelry collections, and entertained on a scale that would make European royalty envious. This combination of retail genius and generational excess illustrates the classic American wealth narrative: the brilliant entrepreneur who builds an empire through innovation and determination, followed by heirs who lack both the founder's business acumen and financial restraint. Indeed, behind every great fortune lies a story of origin, and the Woolworth billions began not with diamonds and mansions, but with the calloused hands of farmers who could never have imagined their bloodline would transform American commerce forever. The Woolworth family saga began not in the gleaming aisles of retail stores, but in the rich soil of England, where their surname derived from the Old English place name Walworth, meaning enclosure of the Britons, or Welshman's farm. By the 11th century, the Woolworths had established themselves as landowners in Surrey, England, with records indicating their involvement in local governance during the Norman era. The transatlantic journey of the Woolworth lineage commenced around 1665, when English farmers bearing the name migrated to the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Richard Woolworth, a weaver from St. Albans, arrived in Newburyport, Massachusetts in 1678, marking the first documented appearance of the surname in colonial records. This enterprising ancestor married Hannah Huggins, daughter of a prominent Suffield, Connecticut family, and acquired land grants along the Connecticut River Valley, establishing the Woolworths as yeoman farmers in the developing colonies. Through successive generations, the family expanded their agricultural holdings, with later descendants growing tobacco and serving in local militia during the American Revolution. Frank's father, John Hubble Woolworth, born in 1821 in Rodman, New York, continued the family's farming tradition. His marriage to Fanny McBriar in 1849 introduced Scots-Irish blood into the lineage, blending English agrarian tradition with Scots-Irish resilience that would later influence Frank's approach to business. Despite their respectable heritage, the Woolworth family's farm in Great Bend yielded only modest returns, placing Frank's childhood fully in the realm of rural economic hardship.
They had been farming for generations, and it was on a small plot of land in the tiny community of Great Bend, New York, that Frank Woolworth was born on April 13, 1852.
Born on April 13, 1852, young Frank balanced farm chores with studies at a one-room schoolhouse where his education emphasized practical arithmetic and penmanship. At 16, Frank left formal education to work full-time on the family farm, but a formative incident would soon ignite his entrepreneurial spirit. In 1868, Frank and his brother Charles saved coins to purchase a 50-cent scarf for their mother, only to face humiliating mockery from store clerks for their small change. An experience that instilled in Frank a desire to create retail spaces where customers could browse without judgment. His entry into the commercial world began modestly in 1873 as a stockboy at Augsbury and Moore Dry Goods in Watertown, New York, where he observed the success of a 5-cent merchandise table, a concept he would later expand into a retail empire. Despite a crushing initial failure when his Utica venture collapsed in 1879, Frank quickly rebounded, opening a store in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, months later that pioneered the fixed-price 5 and dime model. This innovative approach merged his English ancestors' mercantile traditions with Scots-Irish frugality, creating a retail format that would democratize shopping for generations of Americans.
He worked 14 hours a day, stocking shelves, waiting on customers, and creating fancy displays, which he proved to have quite a flair for.
At 21, Frank Woolworth's retail education began in earnest when he secured a position at a dry goods shop in Watertown, New York, earning a modest $3.50 per week. The conventional shopping experience of the era forced customers to request every item from clerks stationed behind counters, a tedious process that created unnecessary barriers between shoppers and merchandise. Despite the monotony, Frank was captivated by the lively atmosphere, the satisfying clink of coins, women haggling over ribbons, and the colorful spools of thread arranged meticulously on shelves. His keen observation revealed a fundamental truth. Customers resented their dependence on clerks for every trivial purchase and yearned for the freedom to browse independently. While vacationing in Pennsylvania in 1878, Frank encountered a small store that displayed inexpensive items on open tables for customers to examine without employee interference, a concept that sent his entrepreneurial imagination racing. Frank's genius was not in copying this idea, but in refining it with a crucial innovation, establishing two clear 5 cents and 10 cents. His first venture, the Great 5-Cent Store in Utica, New York, launched in 1879 with high hopes but crashed spectacularly after just 6 weeks. Undeterred by this initial failure, Frank secured additional financing and tried again in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where his second attempt would alter American retail forever. The Lancaster store opened on June 21, 1879, with a paltry inventory worth just $31, consisting of humble items arranged on open tables.
Tucked away in the corner of the old F.W. Woolworth 5 and dime sits the 74-foot lunch counter, dishing up American classics, much like it did in the 1950s.
We're a burger shake and fries.
Bold signs proclaimed any item 5 cents or 10 cents, no exceptions, a straightforward message that eliminated the uncertainty and intimidation that characterized traditional shopping experiences. By noon on opening day, the store was packed with customers, particularly farmers' wives who delighted in examining merchandise without scrutiny. Frank's modest inventory sold out within days, and by month's end, he had earned $127, enough capital to finance a second location. Word of the novel shopping concept spread rapidly, and by 1900, the Woolworth Company operated 59 stores across the northeastern United States. Just 11 years later, Frank presided over more than 600 locations throughout the United States, Canada, and Great Britain. The true brilliance of Frank's business model lay not merely in low prices, but in his relentless cost-cutting measures. Direct purchasing from manufacturers eliminated middlemen, hiring young, inexperienced salesgirls kept wages minimal, and strategic use of mirrors in small stores created an illusion of spaciousness. Customers felt a sense of wealth and abundance as they browsed aisles of affordable luxuries, a psychological effect that Frank understood all too well. His retail philosophy democratized consumption, allowing even the poorest Americans to participate in the emerging consumer culture that would define 20th century America. By 1900, Frank had transformed from a humiliated farm boy buying his mother a scarf to a retail visionary with enough wealth and ambition to contemplate his next audacious project. Having conquered American retail, Frank Woolworth sought a more permanent monument to his success, a structure so magnificent it would immortalize his name in the New York skyline and stand as testimony to the power of nickels and dimes accumulated by the millions. By 1910, his vision materialized in the form of a 792-foot colossus in Manhattan, the Woolworth Building, an architectural marvel that transformed a humble retail concept into a towering symbol of American capitalism. He commissioned architect Cass Gilbert to design a structure that would blend commerce with cathedral-like grandeur, resulting in a neo-Gothic masterpiece adorned with pointed arches, menacing gargoyles, and a lobby resplendent with gold leaf paintings. The attention to detail bordered on extravagance. 30 miles of brass trim lined the corridors, rare marble floors gleamed underfoot, and intricate craftsmanship transformed what could have been a mundane office building into a temple of commerce. The cost was astronomical, $13.5 million, yet Frank insisted on paying the entire sum in cash, proudly declining loans and financing options. When advisors cautioned him about the excessive expenditure, Frank dismissed their concerns, declaring the building was not for today, but for tomorrow. The grand opening on April 24, 1913, was a spectacle. When President Woodrow Wilson pressed a button in Washington, D.C., 80,000 electric lights instantly illuminated the exterior, causing gasps from the New York crowds. Newspapers dubbed it the eighth wonder of the world, and for a time it was the tallest building on Earth. Yet behind this triumph, Frank's health was deteriorating. 6 years after his building's opening, on April 8, 1919, Frank collapsed during a board meeting, his final words reportedly urging the expansion of more stores as life slipped away at the age of 66. The man who had transformed dimes into a dynasty left behind a vast fortune of $27 million and a family unprepared to shepherd his legacy. His daughter, Edna, inherited significant wealth but had little interest in retail operations, preferring gardens and libraries to boardrooms. Leadership of the company fell to Frank's cousin Hubert, whose preference for golf over governance began the slow deterioration of the once immaculate stores. Tragedy struck when Edna took her own life, her fortune passing to her daughter Barbara Hutton, a young woman ill-equipped to manage such wealth and destined for a life of notorious excess and personal unhappiness. As Frank Woolworth's body was lowered into the ground, the future of his empire remained uncertain. The patriarch was gone, but his name still blazed in electric lights above the greatest city in America. By 1954, Woolworths celebrated $1 billion in annual sales, yet this peak of financial success masked the looming collapse as third-generation heirs indulged in unprecedented extravagance, purchasing yachts, racehorses, and original Picasso paintings with seemingly inexhaustible funds. At one particularly ostentatious celebration, champagne flowed from a fountain shaped like the Woolworth building itself, a fitting symbol of how the empire's assets were being squandered on fleeting pleasures rather than reinvested in the business. The family's disconnection manifested in dangerous corporate arrogance. When new discount chains like Kmart emerged in the 1960s, Woolworth executives dismissed them with contempt. Similarly, when Sam Walton opened the first Walmart in 1962, a Woolworth vice president scoffed that they were the original discounters and newcomers would never catch up, a catastrophic misjudgment. The 1960s brought sweeping changes to American consumerism. Families migrated to sprawling suburbs, automobiles replaced trolleys, and shoppers increasingly demanded spacious parking lots rather than downtown locations. Shopping malls emerged as the new retail paradigm, while Woolworth remained stubbornly anchored to aging Main Street locations with broken steps and limited parking.
Rubbermaid. So for great low prices at Wilco, just look for these signs.
Internal family conflict further accelerated the decline. By 1968, Woolworth heirs, now feuding over inheritance shares, pushed to liquidate valuable assets, prioritizing short-term cash distribution over long-term business viability. The descendants developed a curious shame about their humble origins, viewing the association with five and dime stores as embarrassingly pedestrian and incongruent with their newly cultivated sophistication. In 1974, they attempted to rebrand stores as Woolco and raised prices to compete with upscale department stores, a strategic blunder that betrayed Frank's vision and alienated their core customer base. Longtime shoppers felt betrayed by the transformation. The beloved button bins and jelly bean jars disappeared, replaced by higher-priced goods that neither impressed affluent consumers nor satisfied budget-conscious shoppers. Sales plummeted while Walmart, faithfully adhering to Frank's original philosophy of low prices and no frills, expanded to 125 locations by 1975 as Woolworth's 1,000 stores faded into increasing obsolescence. By 1991, the company faced financial ruin. Stores closed monthly, debt mounted, and the desperate board of directors targeted Frank's beloved Woolworth building for sale.
Everything that pleases, and you can't get fresher than that. Well, Woolworth's the fresh food people, with fresh ideas for you. Well, Woolworth's the fresh food people, and you can't get fresher than that. Australia's Woolworths, the fresh food people.
The proposed sale split the family into warring factions. Older relatives fought to preserve it, while younger trust fund beneficiaries pushed aggressively for its liquidation. After years of bitter infighting, the building was finally sold in 1998 for $155 million. The new owners converted the upper floors into luxury apartments, while workers removed Frank's bronze bust from the entrance hall and covered the commemorative tiles with wallpaper, physically erasing the building's connection to its creator. The proceeds quickly evaporated, used to settle mounting debts and temporarily prop up failing stores. In 1997, Woolworth Corporation announced the closure of its remaining stores, ending a 118-year retail legacy. On July 17, 1997, the final 400 Woolworth stores closed permanently. At the last New York City location, elderly customers lined up before dawn for commemorative coffee mugs bearing the Woolworth name. The company's remaining assets were redirected toward Foot Locker, its athletic footwear subsidiary. The business, founded on buttons, yarn, and candy counters, would conclude its story selling basketball shoes and sweatbands, an incongruous epilogue to Frank's five-and-dime vision. Today, the Woolworth legacy survives only in scattered artifacts, faded signs, collectible lunch counter stools, and commemorative mugs treasured by those who remember a time when 5 cents could buy a small measure of joy across a gleaming counter. Imagine you and your family have decided to visit our lovely capital to do some high-end luxury shopping. As you stroll down Oxford Street, you'll find yourself before an iconic building that forever changed the face of retail, Selfridge's. Now its grand facade still whispers tales of a golden age when Hollywood stars and royalty rubbed shoulders in its elegant halls. But behind these magnificent doors lies a story of spectacular rise and tragic fall. Harry Selfridge, the retail genius who built this empire, led a double life that would ultimately destroy everything. By day, he was London's merchant prince, revolutionizing how we shop. By night, he transformed into a different person entirely, a gambling addict who couldn't resist the siren call of London's exclusive casinos. In today's episode, we'll share the story not just of a beautiful building or a revolutionary store, but a cautionary tale of how one man's secret obsession brought down not only his own future, but also shattered his children's inheritance, as we describe the Selfridges family. When your father gambles away your family's luxury story inheritance. Selfridges, the grand dame of London's legendary shopping capital, Oxford Street, first threw open its lavish doors on the 15th of March 1909, welcoming a staggering crowd of 150,000 eager shoppers. And Harry Gordon Selfridge, that audacious American entrepreneur with a flair for the dramatic, didn't just open a store. He transformed the dreary backwater of Oxford Street into London's sparkling retail mecca. Thus, between 1909 and 1929, Selfridges was revolutionizing the very act of shopping, and the store dared to toss out those stuffy glass cases that kept cosmetics and perfumes under lock and key. And the architectural masterpiece housing this behemoth was built by legendary Chicago architecture Daniel Burnham to the tune of tens of millions of dollars in today's money. Its steel frame construction created the perfect stage for window displays so mesmerizing they captured attention day and night, and the marketing simply dazzled. While Edwardian London still ran on gas lamps, Selfridges illuminated the evening sky with electric displays. He introduced seasonal sales to British shores, launched post-Christmas bargains, and brought Mother's Day to Britain. When Louis Blériot made history crossing the Channel, his aircraft found its temporary home inside the store. Furthermore, the social impact proved remarkable. The store's restaurant served 2,000 distinguished guests daily, including ladies dining alone, quite the sophisticated statement for the era. During the Great War, it became an elegant hub where families gathered to read war updates and write to their soldiers. And today, Selfridge's arguably maintains its crown. The Oxford Street flagship welcomes 15 million visitors yearly, generating $1.1 billion in sales as of 2019. Yet, Harry Selfridge, the retail genius who created this empire, would ultimately become his own worst customer, developing an insatiable appetite for gambling and high-stakes games. And the man who taught London how to shop would end up selling his controlling interest in the company for a fraction of its worth, spending his twilight years as a familiar figure shuffling along Oxford Street, gazing up at the windows of the empire he'd lost. In the harsh winter of 1858, in a small wooden house on the outskirts of Ripon, Wisconsin, a child was born who would transform the very nature of retail commerce. The date was January 11th, and the boy, Harry Gordon Selfridge, entered a world where the echoes of frontier life still resonated through the wooden-planked streets of this Mississippi River town. But to understand the forces that shaped this man, this future architect of modern shopping, one must first understand the intimate geography of absence that defined his earliest years. When Robert Selfridge, Harry's father, abandoned his family in the aftermath of the Civil War, he left behind more than just a wife and 3 children. He left a void that would create an insatiable hunger in young Harry, a constant need to prove himself that would drive him to unprecedented heights, and ultimately contribute to his spectacular fall. The abandonment shaped not just Harry's childhood, but the very architecture of his ambitions. So, the true foundation of Harry Selfridge's education in survival came not from his absent father, but from his mother, Lois. Here was a woman who defied the rigid social constraints of post-Civil War America, and in an era when widowed and abandoned women often faced destitution, Lois Selfridge refused to accept the limitations society placed upon her. She secured a position as a teacher, then rose to become a school principal, achievements that, in the 1860s, marked her as a woman of extraordinary determination. Young Harry watched, absorbed, and learned. There, in their modest home, where every penny was counted twice, and where every meal represented his mother's triumph over circumstance, he received his first lessons in the art of perseverance. Thus, the boy who would later dazzle London society learned first to appreciate the dignity of work, the importance of presentation, and the power of refusing to accept defeat. At 14, an age when more fortunate boys still attended school, Harry Selfridge approached the imposing facade of a local bank. The position he secured there, through sheer force of will and personality, provided more than just an income. It offered an education in the mechanics of money, in the psychology of those who possessed it, and in the subtle art of persuasion that would later serve him so well. But it was his entry into Marshall Field's in 1876, that vast emporium of consumer desire in Chicago, that truly began to shape his understanding of human nature and commerce. Starting as a stockboy, earning $6 a week, Selfridge studied not just the merchandise, but the subtle dance between desire and fulfillment that drove successful retail. Within 2 years, his insights and innovation earned him management of the handkerchief department, a promotion that revealed not just his aptitude, but his ability to transform simple transactions into theatre. Over the next quarter century, under the direct tutelage of Marshall Field himself, Selfridge refined his understanding of retail psychology. Field's famous dictum, "Give the lady what she wants," became more than a slogan to young Selfridge. It became a framework for understanding human desire itself. Through successive innovations, the bargain basement in 1885, the department store restaurant in 1887, the countdown to Christmas campaign in 1890, Selfridge demonstrated an almost uncanny ability to anticipate and shape consumer behavior. By 1891, the stock boy had become a junior partner, commanding an annual salary of $50,000, a fortune equivalent to $1.5 million today. But even this remarkable ascent wasn't enough to satisfy the ambition born in that small house in Ripon. Thus, when Selfridge visited London in 1906, he saw not just a city, but an opportunity, a chance to transform not just a business, but an entire society's relationship with commerce. In the dawn hours of the 15th of March 1909, as workers made final adjustments to the gleaming brass fixtures of London's newest retail establishment, Harry Gordon Selfridge stood at the building's massive entrance, contemplating the transformation of not just a street, but an entire society's relationship with commerce. The structure before him represented more than the £400,000 of capital he had assembled. It embodied a singular vision of what shopping could become in the still rigid social hierarchy of Edwardian London. The path to this moment had begun in 1904, when Selfridge departed Marshall Fields with a fortune and an idea. But money alone couldn't build empires. Understanding this fundamental truth, Selfridge meticulously cultivated relationships with Chicago's wealthiest socialites, transforming them from mere customers into investors in his vision. Each handshake, each dinner party, and each carefully orchestrated meeting added another thread to the financial web he was weaving. The selection of Oxford Street, then a decidedly unfashionable address, revealed Selfridge's deeper understanding of urban transformation. Land prices were lower here, yes, but more importantly, the location sat at the confluence of multiple transportation lines. And Selfridge had studied the flow of London's population, understanding that retail success depended not just on what you sold, but on the mechanics of how customers reached your door. The building itself represented a revolution in British architectural engineering. Daniel Burnham, the Chicago architect who had reshaped the skyline of America's fastest-growing city, brought steel-frame construction techniques that were virtually unknown in British retail architecture. The massive plate glass windows, unprecedented in size for their time, transformed the very relationship between store and street, between commerce and public space. Those windows would become stages where Selfridge would direct elaborate theatrical productions of consumer desire. Inside, Selfridge orchestrated a transformation of retail culture that went far beyond mere shopping. The marketing campaign alone, £36,000 worth of carefully crafted messages, represented more than many stores' annual revenue. But the true revolution lay in the details. Cosmetics displayed openly on counters, breaking centuries of social taboo. Restaurants serving thousands daily in an environment where women could dine unchaperoned. Demonstrations of scientific wonders that transformed shopping into education and entertainment. Throughout the 1910s and into the early 1920s, Selfridge's innovations penetrated every aspect of retail operations. The store's customer service philosophy dismantled traditional barriers between social classes. Personal shopping services, once reserved for aristocracy, became available to the rising middle class. The Information Bureau, a concept Selfridge invented, transformed the store into a hub of urban life, where one could book theatre tickets, arrange travel, or simply learn about the day's events. The rooftop garden, opened in 1911, exemplified Selfridge's understanding that retail success required more than mere transactions. Here, fashion shows mingled with concerts, society gatherings with public entertainments. In winter, a ski slope drew crowds, while in summer, the space hosted demonstrations of the latest technological marvels. Each event, each innovation, served to weave the store more deeply into the fabric of London life. By 1914, when annual revenue exceeded £2 million Great British pounds, Selfridge's had become more than a store. It was a symbol of modernity itself. The profit of £375,000 thus validated not just a business model, but a revolutionary approach to understanding human nature and desire. Harry Gordon Selfridge had not simply built a department store. He had created an institution that would reshape the very nature of urban life and consumer culture in 20th century Britain. Yet, simultaneously, in the dim light of London's exclusive gambling clubs, a chair always remained empty, awaiting its regular occupant. As Wall Street trembled and fortunes crumbled across the Atlantic, life in London's exclusive gambling establishments continued unabated. Yet, at the same time, London's exclusive gambling clubs always held a separate empty seat, awaiting a consistent customer to show up and sit down. Harry Gordon Selfridge had become as familiar a presence at the high-stakes tables as he once was in his grand Oxford Street store. The man who had once calculated retail profits down to the penny now watched thousands of pounds disappear with each turn of a card, each spin of a wheel. And the daily losses, £5,000, equivalent to around £300,000 in today's currency, revealed not just a gambling addiction, but the unravelling of an empire. But the transformation from retail genius to compulsive gambler didn't happen overnight. Like the gradual erosion of a mighty riverbank on the Thames, Selfridge's descent into financial ruin came through a series of seemingly disconnected decisions, each one pushing him closer to the edge. The numbers tell the story. By 1931, in the span of just 5 years, he had squandered over £1 million on the Dolly sisters alone, twin dancers whose hypnotic hold over the aging merchant proved as destructive as any addiction. The relationship with the Dolly sisters illustrated a fundamental shift in Selfridge's character. The man who had once understood the psychology of desire better than anyone now became its victim. When Jenny Dolly lost £40,000 in a single night, Selfridge's response, paying the debt without hesitation, demonstrated how completely his once legendary business acumen had deserted him. The gifts flowed endlessly, matching automobiles, jewelry, even covering their own gambling debts. Each expenditure represented not just money lost, but the erosion of a lifetime's work. As the Great Depression tightened its grip on Britain's economy, Selfridge's personal financial crisis accelerated. The sequence of events became a case study in denial, borrowing against his store shares, selling properties, yet maintaining a staff of servants he could no longer afford. Lansdowne House, his beloved mansion, slipped away, but still he refused to acknowledge the inevitability of his decline. The board of directors at Selfridge's store watched this deterioration with growing alarm. In 1939, the numbers could no longer be ignored. By 1941, the man who had revolutionized British retail found himself stripped of his chairmanship, reduced to a pension of £2,000 per year, a sum that would barely have covered one of his previous evening's gambling losses. In the final years, Selfridge's daily routine took on a tragic rhythm. From his modest flat in Putney, he would make the journey to Oxford Street, standing outside the store that bore his name, watching customers enter and exit through doors that were no longer his to open. The staff, those who remembered his glory days, would occasionally invite him in for tea, a courtesy extended to a man who had once commanded an empire of commerce. When Harry Gordon Selfridge died in 1947, his estate totaled £4,000. The mathematical progression from his peak wealth of £65 million to this final sum represented more than just financial failure. It charted the complete inversion of a life's achievement. His burial at St. Mark's Church in Highcliffe, beside his wife Rose, marked the end of a journey that had begun with such promise in that small Wisconsin town. Soon, his descendants would have to pick up the fallen pieces from the casino store, so to speak. The dissolution of the Selfridge fortune rippled through the next generation like aftershocks from an earthquake. Each child's story represented a different aspect of privilege lost, of expectations suddenly and irrevocably altered. Rosalie, the eldest, embodied the family's attempt to maintain dignity amid decline. Her marriage to Prince Alexander Wiasemski had seemed to secure her position in society, but as her father's empire crumbled, she found herself selling family heirlooms to meet basic expenses. Her loyalty to her father never wavered. She became his lifeline in those final years, managing his meager pension with the same care he had once applied to millions. Violette's trajectory perhaps best illustrated the family's dramatic reversal. Her wedding to French nobleman Jacques de Cibourg had represented the pinnacle of Anglo-American social ambition, a ceremony that commanded headlines across 2 continents. Yet, the eventual dissolution of that marriage forced her to confront a new reality. Living to age 99, she witnessed not just the end of her own privileged existence, but the transformation of an entire social order. Her later years served as an example of how completely wealth and position could vanish within a single generation. Harry Gordon Selfridge Jr., Gordon to family and friends, carried the heaviest burden of expectation. Trained from youth to assume control of the retail empire, he possessed neither his father's innovative spirit nor his natural grasp of human psychology. By the 1950s, the heir to one of retail's greatest fortunes could be found operating a modest bookshop in London, his transformation from presumptive retail magnate to small businessman marking the final chapter in the family's commercial ambitions. Beatrice, the youngest, experienced perhaps the most profound displacement. Her marriage to Serge de Bolotov dissolved, leaving her to navigate the harsh realities of post-war Britain with diminishing resources. Like her siblings, she watched the family name transition from symbol of retail innovation to cautionary tale. The final irony emerged in 2021, when Selfridges sold for £4 billion to a Thai conglomerate. The store Harry Selfridge built had become more valuable than ever, yet his descendants, working ordinary jobs, living ordinary lives, remained disconnected from the fruit of their grandfather's vision. Their story represented more than the loss of a fortune. It demonstrated how quickly the distance between extraordinary and ordinary circumstances could be traversed, how 3 generations could span the gap from creation to collapse to obscurity.